Hello and welcome to another episode of Guess That Record. I am your host, Jackson Reed. This is the show where we talk about music and try to figure out which album I pulled from my collection. Thanks again to you, the listeners, for tuning in to another episode. Our guest today is a record label owner and musician hailing from Hoboken, New Jersey. After starting out in bands like The Individuals, he then became a founder of the independent label Bar None Records, who have been the home to artists like Alex Chilton, They Might Be Giants, and Yo La Tengo. I'm super excited to be speaking with Glenn Morrow. How are you doing, Glenn?
I'm doing all right. Took a Pilates class this morning early and just moved my car.
Nice.
I'll have to move it again at 12:30, but...
And so I'm assuming we're talking to you in Hoboken today. Is that correct?
Well, you actually are not. I actually left Hoboken after living there for the bulk of, I'd say, the 40 years. And I now live up in West Harlem, Hamilton Heights area, which is like 138th Street.
Okay.
On the west side.
Nice.
And sort of have a whole new perspective on things from here. It's great.
For sure. Yeah. I did make it to New York once, but yeah, I never got over to New Jersey, but I did see it from across the river there. So
I can look at my window and see it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And it's great to have you on the show. I sort of mentioned this just before we started, but you're the first guest we've had on this podcast from a record label. So I'm excited to kind of talk about, that side of the business with you today. I always love to start off by asking, what was the first song or the first album you remember hearing that made you take music seriously?
Well, I think the first album I bought was Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles. But that was after having listened to a lot of, borrowing other people's records but I think that might have been the first one I ever personally bought.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't a Beatles fan like a lot of people my age or a little older, I saw them on Ed Sullivan and, I think I saw him on Ed Sullivan, but I remember my dad was really not into the Beatles, and actually, I remember he burned Beatle cards on the grill, some sort of protest. So it took me a little while, but by the time like the Yellow Submarine movie came out, I had sort of they'd creeped into my system, and I was totally into it, and it's a big. And music from, I'd say, like 65, 66 AM radio from those years. I remember, I think some of the first, the Monkees and Rolling Stones, Ruby Tuesday. I think those are kind of things that were on the radio at the time, the Motown stuff. So, pretty typical American kid for the time, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And, the other interesting thing sort of when looking at your career is that, you actually started out as a musician. And was The Individuals the first, sort of successful band you were a part of?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, the band I had before that was a band called A that was kind of short-lived, although we created an album's worth of material that never saw the light of day. But that was with Richard Barone and Rob Norris and Frank Giannini, who went on to form the Bongos, who got signed to RCA and had some success. But yeah, then we went our ways, separated, and I started The Individuals. And oddly, right now, all the former Individuals have new bands, and I think 3 of us are about to put out albums.
Nice.
So.
Yeah. And that's, for those who haven't heard of The Individuals, it's, late 70s, early 80s. And I was, I was going through some of the songs, and there was one I wanted to ask you about, which was Walk By Your House. And I was kind of curious because I'm a guitar player, so it was like the first thing I noticed. Was the guitar on that song like a Rickenbacker by chance?
There very well could have been a Rickenbacker on there. I'm trying to remember. I mean, we definitely had. I think by then I had a Telecaster, and I think John was playing a Stratocaster. But we recorded at Mitch Easter's drive-in studio, so we had access to electric sitars and all. Different guitars might have been used. I'm sure there was a Rickenbacker in there somewhere.
Yeah,
I
because
think the sound of that, the guitars on that, I was trying. I know I mean, it was written pretty much as a group, kind of jammy type thing. But I was actually influenced by Glenn Branca, who was sort of more avant-garde, but had these kind of really open ringing chords, and so that could theoretically, you know, make it sound like a Rickenbacker because it's sort of purposely going for these sort of chord fragments and whatnot.
the jangly
Yeah.
sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. And then, after the individuals, you then formed a new band called Rage to Live, and that's sort of how Bar None came together. Is that right?
Right. I actually wrote some rock biographies of people like Michael Jackson and Prince and Van Halen, and the Michael Jackson one was the second Michael Jackson book to come out after he like exploded with I guess his first album, his first big album, not Thriller, the one before
Off the
Thriller,
Wall.
Off the Wall. And so I made a bunch of money. I used that to fund the album, and then Tom Prendergast, who had been a bartender at the Club Maxwell's, decided after having started a record store, Pure Platters, he wanted to start a record label, and he wanted to put out my records, and that's sort of how that came about.
Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of interesting because the first, I guess, band from outside of your sphere that you brought on to Bar None was They Might Be Giants, and I was curious sort of how that came together.
I was in Tompkins Square Park, and I ran into a woman that I knew from high school, and she was with her boyfriend, who was John Flansburgh at the time, and I think he was in the process of nailing vinyl flexi discs to telephone poles as a way to promote his band. He just sort of struck me as an interesting guy. Anyway, at some point he showed up at my house, and I don't know, I just started helping them out. This was before Bar None was really doing very much. And at some point they just sort of said, we want to be on Bar None. They'd had trouble finding anybody that, they were a little outside of what people thought a band should be at that point, because they were just two guys and a drum machine. But having played in bands in big rock discos, as they were called, I sort of thought, oh, that makes sense. You get to control you get that big dance beat sound of like a record, and almost like a hip hop act or something. And you can sort of control those big unwieldy music venues where the bands don't really sound that good. And I was intrigued by that. And Tom liked them, and that became the second signing. It took I think we sold 10,000 copies in the first year, and then we got them on MTV, and things just took off. So from the very beginning, we sort of thought, oh, we know what we're doing, and we really didn't, but we got very lucky early on with a great band.
This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Marvel Marketing. Marvel Marketing is an award-winning digital marketing company headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Working with clients in different industries from all over North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Marvel Marketing services include website design and development, website maintenance, search engine optimization, public relations services, and social media management, amongst others. To find out more, visit marvelmarketing.ca. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Guitar Works. One of Canada's top independent music stores for over 30 years, Guitar Works carries a huge selection of musical instruments from the biggest brands in music, including Gibson, Fender, Martin, Yamaha, and Paul Reed Smith. Visit any of their 3 Calgary locations or shop online at guitarworks.ca and join the Guitar Perks program to earn money back with every purchase. Guitar Works, your total guitar store. This episode of Guess That Record is also sponsored by Recordland, home to the largest selection of music in Canada. Buy, sell, and trade tapes, CDs, and vinyl. Located in Calgary's Englewood neighborhood on 9th Avenue Southeast, visit them in person or on Instagram at Recordland Calgary. And you know, you mentioned MTV there, and the video in question was for the song "Don't Let's Start."
Right.
And this was something I was actually really kind of curious about coming into this interview. Was that it was able to get on MTV, and that sort of helped get the album off the ground. Now, back then, how would you get a video on MTV?
Well, there was a show called 120 Minutes that was sort of a feeder show. But often you just got, that was just sort of, you were ghettoized into the 120 minutes. I mean, I like to take full responsibility for that getting on there, of course, but there were people we worked with. A woman named Gail Sparrow was somehow like a consultant, and I believe Rick Krim was there at MTV at the time. But I remember we had to come up with, we had to show that Don't Let's Start, was seriously happening at like college radio or something, but we'd already kind of worked it. Like, the record was a year old. So it's like, how do we get more life out of this? And what we ended up doing, we made an EP that had a song on the B side called High Were the Replacements, which they wrote about. They saw all the success that the Replacements were having. They were kind of, sort of fascinated by that. And so they wrote that song. And I thought, if we put that on a record, if we put Don't Let's Start on the A side and High Were the Replacements on the B side of a 12-inch, we can get, in a couple other songs, and we can actually get on the CMJ charts, the College Media Journal charts. And because the Replacements were like number 1 on CMJ at that point. So it worked. And they were actually playing High Were the Replacements, but the record was called Don't Let's Start because that was the A side. And so, we got the numbers from the B side that they were playing, but then we just presented as like, hey, look, Don't Let's Start. It's totally happening. You should add it. And right at Christmas time, there's kind of a lull. Like none of the big record labels are pushing their product at that point. There's like that week or two break, and that's where we kind of slipped it in, and we got in there during the holidays. And then after Christmas, all the kids took their money to the record stores and bought the first They Might Be Giants album.
Right. Yeah. So in a way, it was, not too dissimilar to, trying to get your song on radio. It was, like convincing the right people to, hey, we've got this video and you should take a chance on it.
Right. And we got very lucky. We were just the right mix of things at the right time. And I don't think that that doesn't always happen. We were able to pull it off a couple times, but it's
Yeah.
Now
sure.
he doesn't, it's sort of a thing of the past, really. But that was the game back then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
After that, NPR for a while, you could really sell records through NPR, and that kind of faded away. There was a time when the Village Voice would sell a certain amount of records, different things at different times.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another artist that, has that you've worked with through Bar None that I wanted to ask you about was Alex Chilton of Big Star.
Right.
How did he sort of get involved with you guys?
I was a huge fan from, you know, the first time I saw him play at CBGB's, and obviously everyone knows well, not everyone knows the Big Star story, but it's sort of become this larger than life thing over time, and just uh, I'd sort of been dancing around with Alex for a while. Uh, he offered me an EP, but I thought, there's a couple of good songs on the EP, but if I put that out and nothing happens with it, that'll be the end of it. And so I turned that down, and I pitched a couple ideas to him, and then finally he one day just reached out that he had this album called Set, and did we want to put it out? And that was back, I guess, the late '90s. I'm a little,
Hmm.
I remember. We're actually just putting it out again on Record Store Day on vinyl for the first time
Nice.
on April 1st. And yeah, I just, Alex is someone who I personally was obsessed with, and, just everything about him sort of fascinated me. I loved the music that he made at every single turn of his career. And he was so good at switching it up all the time. Like, every single thing he did was like, why was he singing that one voice in the Box Tops, and then he's singing this other voice in Big Star? And why are the three Big Star records so different from each other and all great? And, how did he end up just playing guitar in the Panther Birds? And, it's just sort of a fascinating uh, career.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, Big Star, I think you could probably make a case for them being like, when you think of like underrated band, they're, you know, the obvious choice for that, because it's like, not a lot of people have heard of them, but they've sort of when you look at who they've influenced, it's
Yeah, they just actually got their first. They got some sort of lifetime Grammy this year. So I mean, which is crazy because that record came out. Uh, those records came out like when I was graduating high school.
yeah,
So that's like, is that 50 years ago? I don't know, whatever 1974 was.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So it's
Now,
yeah, they're timeless records.
for
And I would
sure.
say, if anything, I was talking to Tom Prendergast yesterday. He just happened to call me, and he's the one who started the label. And we were talking about various bar none bands over the years. And I think if we had a modus operandi, it was kind of like, we're not trying to chase trends or be part of a certain kind of genre. We're just trying to make things that, you know, find things that are kind of singular, unique, and kind of stand almost outside of time. They exist in their own universe. So people like Esquivel, the Langley School Music Project, Drink Me. I could go on and on. That's kind of how we've operated.
For
I think
sure. Yeah,
generally,
yeah.
anytime we actually tried to, like, oh, we got this great grunge band, it would turn out they actually really liked, the Love and Spoonful secretly, or they
Mhm.
were our idea of what we thought was au courant was always a little off.
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of good segue into sort of bar none as an organization and everything like that, because the label officially started in 1986, so you guys are approaching 40 years,
Right.
which is awesome. And since you kind of have the experience and all that, I was thinking it'd be great to sort of share with the listeners, like, what exactly does a record label do?
Well, it's definitely changed over the years, and um, I've at this point, uh, there's I work with Mark Lipsitz and Emmy Black, and they're younger than me, and they're a little more engaged in all the twists and turns of the current, what's happening right now. I mean, lately we've been discussing, well, maybe it's like Instagram ads is the way to go. Because it's very weird right now. You're basically, the whole process has evolved. While you might sell some physical product, it's really evolved into streaming. You're not selling anything. You're getting people to click on it, something
Mm-hmm.
very different than trying to sell a 30 count box of records to a Best Buy store, because Best Buy is selling refrigerators and they want to get people in there to actually buy a refrigerator, and they lure them in with some CDs that are cheap. I mean, it's just that, I mean, that whole world is gone. And yeah, it's a very strange time where, it's all about things going viral and TikTok videos, but then, that could go away tomorrow. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's kind of a little bit exhausting.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a lot of work for the artists that, there's a lot of, they can't just make music anymore. They got to be, working their brand and putting up those Instagram links and, you know.
Mm-hmm. And, another thing as well, sort of when talking about labels, of course, there are, the major labels and the independent labels. What would be the difference based on, sort of your experience in the business?
I think the whole major label thing is changing now too. I mean, currently they seem to be really just be interested in streaming. They don't really care about vinyl particularly. We still care about vinyl and try to generally provide that for all our artists. And if an artist is selling vinyl, we keep it in stock. A lot of the majors will just do one run of it and then we'll be done with it. And now I think they're even getting to the point they just don't even want to be bothered with it. I think they're telling the bands more often, you can have the vinyl rights. You can, pay us, and you can, you
Mhm.
can manufacture your own stuff. We don't want to be taking calls from your manager anymore about that. Um, so they're getting more into just big data, trying to, guess. Okay, well, this artist is going viral. If we throw X amount of dollars at it, will it go that much? Get that much bigger, or will it? It's almost the same calculation as a big commercial radio play, only it's in a different environment,
Mhm.
um, spending your money in a different place. And I always just was like, hey, I hear a band I like, I want to work with them. That model seems to have really disappeared at the major labels. It's all just about uh, your numbers and the data, and no one's going to take a chance on you unless you have that all in place.
Mhm. And do you think that at the indie level, it's still very much about, developing artists and putting out what you want to release?
I think every indie label has a different. I mean, some have similar approaches, but some people are just like building massive catalogs with a lot of reissues. Some people have sort of maybe slightly cookie cutter indie rock bands that can fit with other indie rock bands, can go and tour, and I sort of feel for those bands because they never make a lot of money, but they make just enough money that they just stay out there, work, and uh, almost get ahead. But really, once they get off the road, they have to go get a day job, or figure out other ways to make money, like soundtrack work or making Jingle House commercial stuff or something. That kind of sort of subsistence indie rock formula. Uh, yeah, it's a little rough.
Mhm. And, when looking at Bar None.
What happens at the major levels, it tends to you crash and burn quicker. You burn your money faster. You like look up and it's a year and a half later. You're like, what? I'm not. No one's taking my phone calls. Like, what happened?
Mhm.
I got payments on the van, and so I guess when it works, it works, but that's a very small percentage of the time, and a lot of the time it's a real grind.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, when looking at, at Bar None, how much of your time is kind of split between looking after the artists already on the roster and finding new talent?
I mean, I'm proud of the fact that we've constantly kept finding new bands. I think some labels sort of give up on that and just rely on their catalog. Um, but yeah, we have a new band. I just saw uh, three women called Matching Drapes from Berlin. Although one's an American, one's from London, and one's from Sweden, but they live in Berlin, and they're sort of a very unique, eclectic kind of bar none sounding band. Um, yeah, we're constantly trying to find new things and see if they work. It's difficult though, getting the traction. There's so the everyone can make records fairly inexpensively now. Everyone can get worldwide distribution with streaming. Um, so how do everyone can hire a publicist if they have a little bit of money, and how do you get the traction? College radio, that used to actually be important. Most of the bigger college radio stations sold their antennas, and the radio has been reduced to you get a call. Oh, can we get your records? Yeah, we're piped into the dorms. Like, is anybody listening?
Hmm.
There's a lot. People seem to find music through discovery more than ever. Just what their feeds. Say, oh, what's this band? And I'm not even sure how it all happens anymore. You get every once in a while something like Wet Leg just kind of blows up and kicks through in a major way. But it's hard to get traction out there.
For sure. Absolutely. And I was kind of curious, since we're still pretty early in the year. What's on the docket for Bar None in 2025?
Like I said, we have a reissue of the Alex Chilton record, some more Ivy reissues, a matching Outfits album. Um, Little Hag is out there on the road doing a bunch of dates. Everybody's actually going to South by Southwest this week except me. We actually have a Hoboken house, invitation only, that a bunch of different artists, some on Bar None, some just from the area, are going to are sleeping there, and we'll do some performing there as well as playing all over Austin. I'm forgetting about a couple of things, but yeah, it seems like there's a fair amount of stuff coming out this year.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, we are now going to be entering into the guessing segment
Okay,
of
good.
this podcast.
All right.
Now, I'll explain the rules for you and any new listeners we may have. So, in this bag here is a record from my collection. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 clues about this album. And then we play a game of 20 questions to try and figure out what it is. And if you get stuck at any point, I always give hints. So no pressure. Glenn Morrow, are you ready to guess that record?
Let's go.
All right. Here are your 3 clues.
And am I allowed to blurt something out, or am I ruining the game for somebody else? Or
No, if you know it, you know it.
Oh, I know
So,
it. Yeah.
um, so this record was released in the 1960s. It was a major change in direction for this artist, and it features the last top 10 single of this artist's career. Question 1.
I was going to say Pet Sounds, but then they had Kokomo after that.
Yeah.
Well, that wouldn't be it. It's from the 60s. The last top 10, it could be the Box Tops, The Letter.
It's not them.
Or not the Letter. They had some top 10 hits after that. Cry Like a Baby, Soul Deep, maybe.
I'll say that this is a solo artist.
A solo artist, okay. From the 1960s, a solo artist. The last top 10 record in the 60s. I guess I need another clue.
Let's see here.
A lot of people had like what could be one hit wonders. So.
Oh, for sure. Well, this artist was one of the most important of the decade.
Their last top 10 hit in the 60s. Well, that wouldn't be Dylan.
Well, it might be.
Well, he had. How high did Lay Lady Lay go? Wasn't that in the 70s?
60s.
Was it? Lay Lady? Knock on Heaven's Door? That was in the 60s?
No. That was You're Very Warm.
Well, the last record of, I think of this, well, Nashville Skyline was in
it. Yeah, it was Nashville Skyline. Yes. Yeah. So, what can you tell the listeners about Nashville Skyline?
It's funny. It's not one of my favorite records. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge. I do like Lay Lady Lay a lot with Chris Christopherson on bongos. That was a last minute addition that I think probably took that song, that record is just like whatever. He's got Johnny Cash on there doing Girl from the North Country, which is an old song. I just listened to it the other day. I guess after the movie, I got inspired to go back and listen to a lot of stuff. So you have some like little instrumental bluegrass rags on there. There's some good songs. I Threw It All Away is on there, right? And it's about half really solid and half kind of thrown together. But what's actually interesting, if you hold that album up again, I once made a compilation tape, and I took that picture, and I took the picture from Self Portrait and pasted it on his face.
Oh yeah.
And I think I did something else to it, but if you think about that, the period from Nashville Skyline coming out, Self Portrait, and New Morning, that was all that material was recorded in like, a couple of years, and he was just banging out so much stuff. And after I made that compilation, then they put out, a box set of all this other stuff that had never been released from that period.
Right.
Take the best of Self Portrait, New Morning, which I love, and Nashville Skyline. You have there's an amazing amount of really high quality music there.
For sure. Yeah. And yeah, so it was funny. So when I was looking up, and I had to confirm this because it seemed kind of crazy, but Lay Lady Lay was in fact the last single that Bob put out that reached the top 10. It hit number 7 on the charts.
So nothing on Desire?
Nope. Yeah.
And Knocking on Heaven's Door, was that?
Nope.
That didn't make it into.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think there's a lot of songs from Dylan's catalog where you think like, oh yeah, that should have been a huge single, and it wasn't. So
Yeah,
yeah, but Lay Lady Lay, I've always loved that song because it's just
yeah,
like, I think like with the pedal steel and all that, it's really atmospheric and kind of easy to
yeah.
get
And
lost in.
it does seem like they just kind of threw it together, but in a really, it just congealed in a really great way. So,
Hmm.
um, you know, it's funny. I looked up the best-selling Bob Dylan albums of all time, and the three top albums. I can't remember which one is number one, but it's basically two sets of greatest hits. You know, volume one and two, and uh, Blood on the Tracks.
Hmm.
Out of all his other records, which I was sort of surprised to see that. But
Yeah.
um,
And another track from Nashville Skyline that I've always been a fan of is the closing number on the album, which is "Tonight I'll Be Staying Here with You."
yeah,
That's always been a good one.
yeah, I
And
always get that mixed up with "I'll Be Your Baby Tonight," which I always think should be on that record, but it's actually on uh, the album before that he made, the trio album
mhm,
that he made after doing all the stuff with the band.
yeah,
Oh, John Wesley Harding.
hmm and we already kind of touched on it a bit, but it is interesting how I feel like to kind of give it, a legitimacy in the country world, having Johnny Cash on the record is interesting, and doing, a song from, I believe, the freewheeling Bob Dylan with a girl from North
Right.
Country. Not many. You don't often see artists kind of revisiting songs from earlier in their career
Right.
like that, which is kind of interesting. And
Although he just did that on the Masked and Anonymous record, that's all
mhm,
got young, sort of hip musicians to back him up, and they did, really a lot of, his sort of greatest hits
yeah.
from the mid '60s.
And it's funny talking about Johnny Cash. A bit of an aside, but I came across a song of his, and I just want to bring it up because if you go on, for anyone who hasn't heard of it, they should go check it out on YouTube because it's quite bizarre. But I came across this song from the '80s called "The Chicken in Black," and it's almost like a Weird Al Yankovic Johnny Cash song, but it's Johnny Cash doing it. It's really weird.
Go Duck or something.
Yeah.
Getting in
So
on the Go Duck craze.
yeah. So if you want to see a very weird Johnny Cash song, go check that one out because it's yeah, it's something else.
He's got a song that was written by Nick Lowe for him called "The Beast in Me," and there's a very funny. If you ever can find video of Nick Lowe describing how he wrote that and how he presented it to Johnny, it's one of the funniest things
Hmm.
I've ever. I was in a hotel in London, and I saw Nick Lowe on TV describing this, telling this story. I was just in hysterics. So it's up on, "The Beast in Me" by Nick Lowe and ultimately performed by Johnny Cash.
Right. Yeah. And I guess to kind of wrap up the conversation on Dylan, what are some other favorite songs or favorite albums from him that you really
Well,
like?
I'll tell you this weird. This is a weird bar none story. Um, if you like, I'll send this to you, because it definitely, there was sort of a period where there was like a lull at bar none, and nothing was really happening. I think Tom, my original partner, had left, and I'm just kind of, we had this sort of big office. I'm just kind of in there by myself at that point, maybe with one other person coming in part time, and trying to figure out where are we going, what are we doing. And I had a bootleg CD of that record that ultimately came out of Dylan and the band live at in uh, it was supposedly live in London at, Albert Hall or something, although it was actually from somewhere out in the English countryside, but they thought it would sound cooler if they said it was Albert Hall. Anyway, it was a bootleg version. It ultimately did come out. And anyway, I put the bootleg into the CD player, and at some point it just got like this digital glitch happened, and it just started, kind of jiggering.
Skipping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was kind of fascinated by that, and eventually I put a cassette in. And I started like banging the CD player and making Dylan's voice jump around, and he almost sounded like he was speaking in tongues, and it was him singing "Mr. Tambourine Man," but it just became unzing, 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 all these like weird noises. But like, this is really interesting. Like, it's still Dylan, but it's like this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up writing like a 50-page thing that I called Zim, which was sort of like Zim is like the essence of Dylan, this like rarefied thing. And it was kind of crazy, obsessive writing, but it sort of all in a weird way held together. At one point, we had to go to our distributor to a conference, and I think I told them that we'd gotten DJ Spooky to remix the Dylan catalog. We'd gotten the rights from Columbia to remix the Dylan catalog, and I played some of this thing that I'd made, and half the people knew it was a joke, and the other half were like, "When do we get those Dylan remixes?" So that's my weird bar none Dylan story, and I've just been revisiting it now because we actually just got these lathe cutting machines at Bar None to do like short. This is like the new old thing, right? These lathe cutting machines actually were used at radio stations in the 1940s to do single copy recordings, just like mastering a record, right?
Yep.
You're like cutting into a lacquer, and an artist would come, and sing a song maybe with a piano or something, and they would cut one of these, and then they could play it on the air later in the day. And every radio station in America had one. And eventually, tape came along and they became obsolete. But now they're sort of coming back as kind of a rare. You can do these kind of mid-fi one-off recordings, and they're almost like etchings. You make 100, and you can have a very unique piece of product that's, it's a single, but it's like super limited, and I don't know, we'll see where that all heads. But I've been cutting some the Zim thing.
Nice.
Just for fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, we have reached the end of the interview. I want to thank Glenn Morrow for taking the time to come on the podcast and, talk about Bar None and everything you got going on. So it was great to have you.
A pleasure, Jackson. My son's name is Jackson, too, by the way.
Oh, cool. Nice. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Guess That Record. Make sure to leave a 5-star review and tell your friends to check us out. I also want to shout out our radio partners currently airing Guess That Record as a syndicated show. CKMS in Kitchener, Ontario, CKXU in Lethbridge, Alberta, and South Devon Sound in Kingsbridge, UK. This summer, Guess That Record will also be airing on KVCU in Boulder, Colorado. So if you're in those markets, be sure to check those stations out to hear the show. If you're with a radio station and you'd be interested in adding Guess That Record to your programming, send us an email to guessthatrecordpodcast@gmail.com. We'd also appreciate it if you follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our username on both platforms is @GuessThatRecord. And lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the video versions of these amazing interviews. Remember to keep rocking, and we'll see you on the next episode of Guess That Record.